Akimbot, Ratchet and Clank, Banjo-Kazooie, Jak, and Daxter. Outside of dual protagonists and basic platforming, what do all of these games have in common? If your answer is nothing, then you would be correct. Okay, some of them do have banging music. And that is exactly what you should expect if you decide to pick up Akimbot in hopes of filling the void these developers have left us with. Released on August 29th, 2024, comes an action-adventure platformer from the developers Evil Raptor and publisher PlayOn. I will say that I never heard of Evil Raptor until now. However, it appears that their first game called Pumpkin Jack, which was released back in 2020, was relatively successful. Digging a little more into the background, I found that there are 6 of them in total, meaning that this is a small studio, so your expectations should follow suit. As Akimbot sits on Steam today, its overall reception is very positive, and in this video, I wanted to give my take on why it should only be positive at best. So to those curious about trying this game or maybe even purchasing it, I want you to join me on my adventure through Akimbot to answer the most important question of all. Is it worth the play? To properly answer that question and more, I will be assessing the gameplay, the story, the voice acting, and its overall replayability. So let's rock and roll. First, let's address the robot in the room here. Contrary to how the demo may portray this game, this is not an indie version of Ratchet and Clank. Yes, I know we have XC and Chipset who remind us of Ratchet and Clank, but this time they are both robots. As you traverse through the galaxy, XC gains a total of 4 guns, which serves as his tools of destruction. There's your standard gun, a sniper rifle, a rocket launcher, and a mini machine one, as I like to call it. Outside of the starter gun, the other 3 serve their purpose of damaging specific enemies and their shields. On top of that, you will run across vendors throughout the stages who allow you to purchase what I like to call the ultimate weapon for your arsenal. Ironically, this is the only weapon that can be upgraded, though it is meant to be used the least. I say that as there's no ammunition in this game. It instead replaces ammunition with an overheating mechanic, which encourages the player to swap weapons. However, the overheating meter is deceptively low. Anyways, as enemies are destroyed, this builds up energy, which then allows the use of the ultimate weapon. On paper, this sounds interesting, but in its execution, it's anything but. The ultimate weapons take forever to charge up, and their ammo capacity is hilariously stingy. It's like, hey, here's this cool weapon, but we don't want you to use it, so just cycle through the 4 we have given you with no customization or upgrades. Outside of popping caps, the planets are filled with a mix of platforming, wall running, hookshotting, ship flying, and well, you get the point. If there's one thing I will praise, it's XC's fluid movement when you time his dodge and jumps correctly, but that is about it. Going back to the platforming segments, however, this was something I appreciated at first, but by the end of the game, it just started to grind my gears, as some of them seemed to go on forever without any variance. If I recall, there is a certain ship segment where I spent about 20 minutes just on rails shooting stuff over and over. For a second, I thought it was over, and then the game was like, yeah, let's do this again, literally right now. While the different traversal options are great, the pacing in this game is anything but, which makes these segments more tedious than exciting, especially after the first time. This is a sentiment that I also share with the puzzles, as they are randomly generated between 4 options. This means you can and eventually will get the same style of puzzle back to back to gain access to the next area. I get what the developers were going for, however, outside of figuring out a few codes with images, the randomly selected puzzles got old quickly, as they too lack variance. Now, I am aware of how harsh I may be coming off with the gameplay, but with finite time, I like to make sure it's spent skillfully. So let's move on to something even worse than the gameplay, which is the story. XE, who is a mercenary, joins forces with Chipset to go off and stop Evilware from gaining an artifact that would allow him complete control of the universe. And that is about it. It is right to the point without any fluff goal-wise. Execution-wise, it does drag its feet a bit here and there, especially later on in the game. But if I'm being honest, it is not so much the story that is important for platformers like these. It's the characters within them. And it is here where they lost me. XE comes off as this abrasive, non-communicative robot and shows very little growth throughout his journey. Shipset, who is supposed to be the personality of the duo, quickly becomes annoying with his antics as they are neither funny nor informative. These flaws are fine at the start of the game, but by the end of it, due to the lack of development, I felt no attachment to Shipset or XE. It is quite sad, as there were times where it felt like there was a glimmer of hope, especially for XE. However, that is all that it was. This makes things a bit problematic, as even with great voice actors, if the script isn't there, then their performance won't be either. But I do want to give a shout out to Reese Brigger, who, correct me if I am wrong, voiced both XE and Shipset according to my sources. Unfortunately, the writing let you down, my dude. Lastly, let's talk about its overall replayability. From what I could find, Akimbot does not offer any real incentive to come back and replay the game. There are no alternate skins for XE or Shipset, there are no extra guns to be unlocked, there is nothing. It is just congratulations, thanks for playing. To me, that is the biggest letdown in all of this. The game just lacks any incentive to play it again unless you want to try out a different weapon. I, by the way, managed to get nearly 2 of them fully upgraded before the curtains dropped, and as stated previously, you barely get to use them to begin with. With all of that being said, where does this leave Akimbot in terms of being worth the play? Well, for the full price of $20 USD, it is not a game I would recommend unless you know what you're getting yourself into. Though this game has come out in the modern day, its roots feel closer to that of an early 2000s platformer than something from the last decade. While XE's movement is great and combat is basic, it is the lack of gun and obstacle variety that hurts it in the end. The vehicle sections were cool at first, but quickly began to overstay their welcome as they just went on for far too long. Story-wise, well, you're not playing it for the story, as it's neither interesting nor emotionally engaging. But at least the game wants you to replay it, right? Well, at the time of this video, no, not really. While my takes on this game may seem brutal, it is important to note that this is an indie title, as I mentioned in the beginning. This game was produced by a team of 6 with a budget that was more than likely much smaller than the first Ratchet & Clank game back on the PlayStation 2, so it is reasonable to have gripes here and there due to the lack of experience in the team. But even in a pool of other $20 indie games, this is one that I would recommend only on sale in its current state. Perhaps an update or two will roll out, which tweaks some of the tedious segments or adds an incentive to come back and play it again, but for now, Chief called and said this wasn't it. Even though this product is far from perfect, it was enough to catch my eye and even make a video on. So at the very least, it is apparent that these indie games are gaining more and more traction every year. And I'm not opposed to trying a sequel of Akimbot if it ever came to fruition.
Oh my boss! Look at the size of that thing!